You can pause recording, says David.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks. All right. So here we go. Welcome to week 3, decision making. So the objectives today are to understand what kind of decisions we're using now. Before I got into this work and this exploration of what it means to be self-managing, self-governing, and self-organizing, I don't really think I thought about what kind of decisions I make day to day, let alone what decision-making methodologies I use. Back in the dark ages, I used a process of decision making. I can't even remember what it was called now, but it was like this process of wants versus needs and weightings, and very like mechanistic way of making decisions, which I actually used in my personal life a couple of times to do things like to determine which house to rent, or different things like that. But
wait, what would you do? You would say, is it like a need or a want before you would rent a particular property?
Yeah, it was basically making a list of the things that it needs to have. So let's imagine that you're going to rent a place to live. So it needs to have a dishwasher, it needs to have a bathtub. I'd like it to have a view, and I'd like it to be within, I don't know, half a mile of public transport. And then you give all of those elements rankings, and then you kind of do a matrix and then get a score at the end. But oftentimes, and my husband will laugh at this, because I can remember one time specifically when this happened, is that the score for the house that I really didn't want came out higher, and so I ended up making an emotional decision anyway. But I guess this is just an example of how rare it is, how rare it was, at least for me, in most of my life, to even think about what kind of decisions I make and what kind of decision-making methodologies I use. So this session and this week, we're going to be exploring collaborative and participatory decision-making, which are, I guess, types of decision-making that you can't do by yourself, and that we need a team to do. And I think that a place like Consensus gives us the opportunity to really start practicing the power of these ways of making decisions together. And then obviously to understand sort of the optimal level of participation for different types of decisions and different types of decision-making methodologies. So we'll be all familiar with the onion by now. So the mindset around making decisions collectively is around primarily embracing divergence and convergence. And what this means is, and Alana has created this great one-page slide that I use all the time to understand, like, if you are making a proposal for a decision in a group, the thing that you want, or the thing that I have come to really value up front, is all of these divergent opinions and challenges and thoughts about a particular decision. And then, like, feeling that you get when, through a level of moderation and time, you get to this level of convergence where the proposal and the decision becomes ripe and ready to be put forward. This is a mindset that most organizations don't employ, because in most organizations, decisions are made by somebody at a higher pay grade than you. And because that's always been the way, from our family, where our parents made the decisions, to school, where the teachers made the decisions, to the workplace, where normally it's people with higher pay grades make the decisions. Like, to practice actually doing this well collectively is a real skill we need to learn and muscles we need to build. So the principle, again, is how, and that's not saying, and I would never say, just as I would never say that there's no such thing as or use for a hierarchy, say that there's never any one way of making decisions. I would never say that all decisions need to be consensus-based or even collaborative. because as our friend Samantha Slade says, the greater the risk and duration, the more a decision should be made collectively. Decisions that are shorter duration or have less of a risk can be left really sweetly to one or two people. So that's the principle that we're going to be really leaning into this week as we talk about decision making. The practice goes back to the mindset, right? Noticing and choosing the decision types. And one of the tools that have been developed to help us do this in a way where we can't always be in the same room, sitting in a circle, or even in the same city, where we're able to get together regularly to do that kind of in-person synchronous divergence so that we can come to a convergence, is a tool called Lumia, which allows us to do that asynchronously. And Alana will take us through a demo of that. So decision types. Over to you, Alana.
Cool. So yeah, hopefully people have had a chance to look at the 9 types of decisions. It's a really short article that basically is just this list, but we can go over it now. So that I just think that having basically a toolkit of different decision types in your mind can be really helpful. And as Susan said, there is absolutely no one right answer to what decision type is the right one. Actually, it's a skill of, thinking about the situation that you're in and thinking about all the different decision types that there are, and then making choices. Like the vast majority of decision making that people participate in and that I've observed is just this sort of unconscious decision making where you're not thinking about these things or asking these questions of like, well, what are the types of decisions that we could use? What are the best one for this situation? And instead, a lot of times it's just not even made explicit, or there's no agreement about decision making protocols, or it just defaults to kind of like, the way that we've always done it, or the easiest path. So anyway, I think just knowing about different decision-making types can be interesting and useful. So just, I'll just really briefly go over them. And if anybody has any questions or wants to discuss them more in depth, please jump in. Just to let you know, after this, we're going to be digging into a little bit of the pros and cons of a few of these different types of decisions, and we'll break into groups to discuss that and then come back together. And then we're going to do an individual exercise to help think through some decisions from your own life and figure out what types they were. Okay, so dictatorial, this one's really simple. There's a person who makes all the decisions. That's it. We have probably all experienced this, maybe in maybe in a family, it's the parents are making all the decisions and the kids don't really get a say, or maybe it's a really hierarchical workplace so the boss just makes all the decisions. Delegated is basically a way to scale that dictatorship in some ways. So it's this typical pyramid shaped. There's a small group of people or somebody at the top, but they can't actually be involved in everything, so they delegate other people to make decisions in specific areas. But importantly, I think it's that the people on the top retain the accountability. So ultimately it does come back to them, even though obviously people play a lot of games in that space to deflect accountability and all that stuff. Decentralized is where authority has devolved to different teams or projects or regions, and so they can use their own processes internally. I think there's a lot of decentralized decision making at Consensus where individual teams and spokes and stuff are kind of empowered internally, but there is authority beyond that at some level. Unanimity is basically everybody has to agree to every decision made. And I think people sometimes have had experiences of this too. Like if you're with a group of 4 friends and you're all deciding what to eat, if somebody's like, no, I don't want pizza, you're probably not going to be like, we're going to have pizza anyway. There are lots of times when we aim for these unanimous decisions. But I do want to really point out the difference between unanimity and consensus. And it's just a dumb situation with these words and how we use them in different contexts. Personally, I don't really care about holding on to the word consensus, but maybe we should just have a different word. But basically, consensus decision-making in the technical sense, and this is among decision-making theorists and people who have long-standing work in cooperatives and all this kind of stuff. It just basically means it goes ahead unless there are no blocks, and a block being a very serious disagreement. And so that's kind of, in a way, like, people think consensus means everyone has to agree, but actually it can mean the opposite, that some things that most people don't like very much go ahead just because they don't have any serious block to raise about it. So we will get into more, you can talk about that more in detail, but hopefully that's at least clear. So yeah, if people are confused by this terminology, I don't blame you. It's very confusing. But this concept of go ahead unless there's no blocks will be coming up in a few different decision types that we talk about today.
Can you just say a tiny bit more about what blocks are and what's the difference between a disagreement and a block?
Yeah, sure. So different groups have different cultures around blocking. I lived in a housing co-op where we made all the decisions by consensus in a group of like 25 people. And we used the what I would call the traditional consensus decision making, where people would put in proposals and they would be passed if there were no blocks. And in that kind of context, where you are very connected to the other people and the things that you do affect each other, and you're interdependent with others, and you have built up relationships and trust, a block is just a very serious thing. The way that we defined it in that context was, a block means if this goes ahead anyway, even though I'm blocking it, I'm going to move out. I'm going to leave the group. And I have heard that definition used a lot. That's basically like, yeah, a block means if the group goes ahead anyway, you will leave because you can't in good conscience stay in that group, a group that decides to do this thing. That's how seriously you take it. There's risks with blocking if you don't have a good blocking culture. If people are not acting in good faith, or are playing out some thing on the group, maybe a power trip or something like that, or maybe being overly ideological or not listening to others, and they're using blocking like a veto, it can be incredibly destructive. And so that's why consensus decision making isn't always the right choice. Like, you do need a very specific kind of culture and set of relationships to use it well. The thing is that, yes.
I have a question. Would a block be kind of like how the structure of the electoral college, and even though like the majority of people wanted a certain action, they were able to veto that and pick another action?
Yeah, a block is similar to a veto. Like, even if everybody else wants it, if it's blocked, it means it's not going to go ahead. Okay. And the reason for that is a recognition that the majority opinion is not always correct, and that sometimes minority voices are saying something very important, and a recognition that if somebody feels that strongly about it, it's not good enough for us as a group to settle on a solution that somebody like really feels that strongly negatively about. And I think in a lot of groups where we have very caring and trusting relationships with others, that might be intuitive to understand that, no, if somebody like absolutely is against that and says, no, this is going to like destroy our group, or this goes against the very principles that we are based on, or this will be dangerous for me as a person, like I will get killed, or whatever it is that's so important, we're going to listen to that. It's a recognition that diversity is a strength, and that other people's experiences and priorities are different to yours, or different to the majority. The cool thing about consensus, so this all sounds like, I think, heaps of work and a lot of risk in a way, which it can be. The cool thing about consensus is that when it works well, it's utterly transformative. Like, I think some of the moments in my life when I have grown the most as a person is when somebody else has blocked, and I have, through the subsequent conversations and process, changed my mind by deeply understanding something completely different than I thought coming in. And those moments, grow connections between people very strongly, and are an invitation for you to transform and transcend and grow as a person as well. So yeah, absolutely, it can be an absolutely transformative social process when well facilitated. Oftentimes it is not well facilitated, so that's an issue as well. So we can talk more about consensus and pros and cons and stuff. Let's jump to the next slide. Oh nope, go back. There we go. Susan's going to talk about advice and integrated, and then I'll jump back in.
So the advice process is one of my favorite type of decision-making methodologies, although it's often misused. So in an organization where everybody is super clear on their roles and what accountabilities they hold from within their roles, the advice process really is a practice where, let's just give you an example. So let's say that my role is webmaster. So I'm ultimately responsible for the UX and content on the website. I might have a idea that I want to change the color scheme on the website. It's, as webmaster, that's completely within my purview and within my role accountability to do so. But this is very important to the rest of the organization, and it's super important to maybe to some of the people in the company that have products whose color scheme is like diametrically at odds with what I'm proposing for the website. So I'm not just going, even though it's in my purview, I'm not going to do this willy-nilly. So I'm going to go and have a conversation with that particular product owner. I might decide that I want to have a conversation and get advice from some trusted users to see how this decision that I'm contemplating might impact them. I might have discussions with either the whole organization if I think everybody's going to be impacted, or just those few individuals who are. But at the end of the day, after I've gotten that advice, it's completely within my remit to make that decision for myself. Another example of using the advice process is when you are making a decision that might require some advice from legal, for example. So you want to make a decision about maybe, I don't know, let's just say creating a contract with a potential new client that wants a different IP clause. You're certainly going to, at the end of the day, it's going to be up to you whether or not that decision is made, but you're going to have to go and seek advice from the legal team before you can actually make that decision. This is a process that's used in many of the most mature self-managing organizations because it allows those decisions that are held within the remit and the responsibility of a particular role to be done quickly and be done with full accountability of the person who's ultimately responsible. Any questions on that? Are any of you using this at all in your work? The advice process.
Yeah, I do.
Can you give us an example of how you might use it, Tim?
Yeah, I'll just ask around what other people think about getting reimbursed, or how they do reimbursements. Or maybe like I'll ask like some technical people some opinions on like architecture or design for random things.
Oh, great! Both those are really great. Both great examples. Yeah, so that's the advice process. And like I said before, in my experience, this works really well when roles and accountabilities are well defined. It works less well when those things aren't in place. The integrated decision-making process. I know, Rosa, for example, you've had some experience in holacracy. So the integrated decision-making process is a proposal-based process. And I would love for consensus to become a proposal-based culture, because I feel like in many cases the integrated model of decision making is the one that allows us to grow the most. So somebody taking responsibility for a proposal, the proposal goes up for somebody makes a proposal, then there's a round of clarifying questions on the proposal, a round of reactions to the proposal, and then, as Alana was describing in the consensus process, as long as there are no blocks or objections, the language is a little bit nuanced here, then the proposal becomes part of the governance of the group or the team or the organization. So that's integrated decision making. I'll hand it back to you, Alana, to talk about emergent and collaborative, because I get confused.
Sure. Okay. Emergent is not a deliberative process. So you're not talking back and forth and like changing your mind or building ideas together. Emergent is where everybody takes individual actions or makes individual decisions, and the collective decision arises out of that. So like the classic example is voting. Like you're not negotiating your vote with other people. Everybody votes, and then the results emerge out of all of those individual choices. There are other examples, like I think a lot of times open source software is kind of like emergent decision making, even though in reality there's lots of negotiation and building on each other's ideas. But you could imagine like if a bunch of people just each put in their bit that they want to build, and then what emerges is the direction of this open source software project. Co-budget is another example, which is a tool that we use in Inspiral for financial decision making, where it's not a situation where we all get together and have to agree what we're going to spend money on or negotiate between us. In co-budget, like money is given out to people as individuals, and you spend it on what you want to spend it on, that projects that people propose. And so like you can get advice, or you could negotiate among other people to all spend your money on something, but it's designed to not require that. It's designed to be individual decisions out of which emerges the collective will. And collaborative is like the opposite of that. Collaborative is a facilitated process that I will go into, and I put that diagram that Susan mentioned later in the slide deck, and we can talk about it more in detail, but it's basically the opposite of emergent in the sense that everybody talks to each other and comes to one decision together. And there's a part of it which is divergence, where you're opening up to new ideas or what are all the possibilities, and then there's convergence, where you come together and like, cool, this is the conclusion, this is what we are deciding. And you can, sometimes collaborative decisions are consensus, sometimes they're a vote, and it doesn't really matter. It's just a process. It's a process for getting a bunch of people to shared understanding and a shared decision. And we'll go into more detail on that, because that's the process that Lumio was designed with. Cool, let's keep going. So now I thought it would be a good idea to break into groups and start to think about some of these different decision types. Like I said, and Susan said at the beginning, there's no like one best decision type. They're good for different things in different contexts, and there are pros and cons to each and every one of these decision types. So our idea was to look at a few of them. I think we picked out 4, and I'll put them in or Susan, can you write them in the chat? They're decentralized, emergent, consensus, and advice. And I'll just remind people what those are. So we'll break into groups and we'll talk about what are the pros of that decision type and what are some of the cons. So it could be things like goes slower, goes faster, includes more people, or is clearer. There's lots of different variables that you could consider. So I will just to repeat the definitions of these. Decentralized, I think, is similar to how, say, the consensus network or the mesh is organized, where there may be some high authority, but there are lots of like teams or areas or projects or geographies where they're empowered to, among themselves, decide how things work, and they can use different decision-making protocols within their team or whatever, but there's no one.
I have a question.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is what you just described a monarchy?
Yeah. So.
Okay.
Probably a monarchy with like within which there's probably like fiefdoms or anarchist zones or like whatever all in the nation. Yeah, maybe.
So like a cluster of monarchies, and then maybe an absolute monarchy.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's important to remember that decentralized doesn't, that whatever the authority is doesn't say, and this is how you will function and this is how you will make decisions. That's more like delegated. Okay, so decentralized is one. Emergent is the other one. Just think about voting, basically. Individual decisions are taken, and out of that emerges the collective decision. What are some of the pros and cons of that? Consensus, and again, we're using this word in a technical way. Consensus meaning it goes ahead as long as there are no blocks, as long as there are no very serious objections, the proposal passes. It's not unanimity. It's not every single person thinks this is the best idea ever. And the last one, advice process, which Susan just talked about, which is basically a decision maker has accountability or is empowered in a certain area, but they go out and seek advice, and then ultimately they make the decision. Okay, so those are the 4 types. we're going to talk about, in our groups, pros and cons to each. Does anybody have any questions before we break into groups?
So last time we broke into groups, we lost the text chat bot. So should we just like copy?
We can send it out. Susan, we can send out the 4 types to everyone, right?
Yeah, I can send it out to broadcast as soon as I put you guys into the group. So I'll do that now so that you have
Awesome.
everything.
Thank you.
All right, we'll give you about 20 minutes to go through all 4 of them, and then we'll come back. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
How many, was it just 2 groups?
Yeah.
Cool.
Hold on, let me see.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I think, is that everyone? Cool.
I just came back from the Matrix.
Welcome to the other dimension.
I met the architect.
Okay, Rosa's having her video off. That's cool. And Jem, are you there? I can't see you.
Yes, I'm here. Oh, yeah, I don't know why we blocked.
Oh, cool. Sweet.
Yeah.
All good. Okay, cool. So, I'd like to touch on each of the 4 decision types. And as you all are sharing some of the pros and cons, I'll just note them down, and then I can share my screen after and show you. It's just hard to see each other on the screen at the same time. How about decentralized decision making? Does one of the groups want to go first and talk about some of the pros and cons that you talked about for decentralized decision making? Should I call in someone? Tim.
All right. We had talked about decentralized decision making and how it Kevin thought it was a subset of an emergent decision-making policy, and I told him I'd have to write that down on paper and think about it. Kind of just how it is a natural extension of emergent decision-making, and that it makes sense for little things. And I guess I don't know, did Jem or Kevin want to say anything?
We also thought similar to advice-based decision making, if roles are well defined, it can be very useful. But if the roles are not very well defined, then there will be conflict among those groups or even people. And I remember saying that especially there's going to be some stuff, there are going to be some decisions that can be delegated into the small centralized groups, and some decisions that everybody will have to come together, and you have to apply another decision making process for that.
Yeah, especially if you're allowing each group to use their own decision making process. This seems like a meta decision making process in a sense, right? But yeah, once you start trying to align on strategy, right, and everyone's using their own process, that can just be a real pain, right? So,
were there any pros that came out of your discussion for decentralized decision making?
I mean, it kind of gets to, it just makes things better to scale, I think, right? So if you just trust this one discrete unit to figure out what they need to do, you don't have to spend a whole lot of time setting up a decision-making organism for the entire team. You can just have each one be okay, just figure out what works best for you. And every group is going to probably be different anyways, right? And so because there's this customization, it allows them to be flexible, right? But at the same time, it doesn't put too much burden on sort of the setup, in my opinion. So.
I have a question. Have Alana or Susan, have you guys analyzed Montessori education and seen how that works relative to all these things we're talking about?
That's a cool idea. I know a little bit about Montessori, but I haven't thought about it in the context of decision making. What's coming to mind for you?
Just like self-organizing, and I feel like the Montessori education allows you to follow your interest and do what you want to do or are interested in. And I think consensus is kind of like that to some degree.
We have in Inspiral like a disproportionate amount of like Steiner education graduates, and like, which is I think quite similar to Montessori, like Waldorf and all of that. So I think there is, some people who are used to taking responsibility for themselves and also like engaging in collaborative processes as a responsible person. Like, I don't know, I think that might be something they learn in that kind of schooling.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I was invited to do some governance advisory for a Steiner school, and they're not doing any of this.
Okay, right. Totally depends on the school.
So
how about? Oh, sorry. Yeah. Will you speak to the other group?
Yeah. Our conversation was a little bit more meta, but kind of as an individual contributor here, like I'm not going to speak for my group here. I wanted to unpack. That's like maybe it'd be interesting to unpack like the terms that are defining decentralized in terms of, well, there's the use of authority and then devolved, and both of those seem interesting to me. Like, if there's like another model, there's like something powering a decentralized decision-making process where there's like authority granted to let other teams function the way that they want to, and that's not necessarily like, it could just like, how does that affect how the teams are actually, or the regions are actually end up choosing their decision-making processes, right? Like that the authority maybe influences that, right? And also like devolved, I don't know, to me it sounds like some sort of step back, but maybe more just means like breaking it down, like letting, it's like almost like delegating or something, I don't know, but like something like giving up the power to make a decision.
How do you think it works in consensus? Like, would you say that this is like the way that the mesh in general works, and what do you think in that context?
Yeah, at a macro level, like if you look at in one perspective, that is definitely how it functions. But when you look at like maybe how like authority makes decisions, it's like maybe different, or how different. I think this is the area of discussion we were actually talking about a lot too, with David and Rosa and I, where there are a lot of instances where a label can be like applied to a certain outcome or decision or a project, and then there's effort trying to be like to follow that maybe, or and then the outcome is like actually determined in another way. So it's maybe a claim or an attempt to do it under one framework or process, and then the reality, if you were to do some sort of retrospective, is that it isn't. It wasn't actually like following those types of guidelines or models. So, yeah, we're thinking about how we might be able to like learn from that or avoid that, or and our general thought was like having it clear in the beginning, and then some sort of way to review or have this retrospective on once that the decision is made. Did it actually follow those types of models?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, what's the feedback loop for decentralized decision making? And I'm sure all these types of decision makings do or don't have feedback loops, right? Which kind of guide them or make them converge to diverge, or I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of diversity even within examples of decentralized decision making, for example. So maybe the wider community does have a process of doing retrospectives, or maybe there's an overall strategy that you can track against, like, okay, are we actually going where we said we wanted to go? Is this working? Or maybe there is no good feedback process, and yeah, people don't have that good connection to figure out if it's working, or to even to have their voices heard. So I think it can be done well, and it could be done badly, and it can be done in an empowering way, and it can be done in an alienating way. All right. Any more? Well, I think that's probably quite a few pros and cons on decentralized. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on emergent decision making, like where your individual decisions add up to the collective. I'm just going to close this door. Go ahead, though. Jem, did you want to share any pros and cons of emergent decision making?
Yeah, why not? Emergent decision making pros and cons. Well, oh yeah, I thought there was potentially those types of decision makings. I guess a con would be that they could potentially be exploited. Right? Because if everybody's acting in their own capacity to make their own decisions, and they're emergent, then potentially any actor could create like a higher authority action and structure to where they potentially get cut off or are subject to that higher emergent type of structure kind of thing if you're not careful or whatever. Yeah, or you could just get lost.
Well, we certainly see that in political voting, don't we? That lots of different actors and people are trying to manipulate the process and everything. Jem, did you want to jump in? I think you were trying to talk before.
He's just put into the chat that he's having difficulty with his connection.
Oh, well, okay, maybe that's what he was trying to say. Did anybody else want to add in pros and cons of emergent decision making?
I think maybe for a con is that if there's potentially some sort of waste in effort or redoing things. I can see in like contributing to open source. I think there's a lot of great things about it, but perhaps there is still someone who's making decision to merge code into the main code base. So there could just be a lot of open or even the things that are closed is just not necessarily used in the end. But I think it could be fine. It seems to be fine. It's just something to note. Yeah, David just added something.
David says there's a con of, groups tend to polarize, tend to become more harsh or more lenient than they would with other styles. A pro emergent is quick and efficient, sometimes at the expense of individual voices. Yeah, it's interesting. I think you could say in one way, it's at the expense of individual voices. Like if they're not in the majority, then they just aren't listened to sometimes. And in another way, it is all about the individual voice because you don't have to compromise with anybody else. You just, you can put in what you want to put in. But definitely, I think also just the clarity of results is sometimes a pro. There's no ambiguity if you're doing a majority rules vote or something like that. But a big con is a lack of deliberation and no one has all the information and you haven't thought of all the best ideas. And if you're not all talking to each other, then there's no chance of kind of coming up with something better than anybody started with. Yeah, so I'm just trying to note David's pros and cons in the notes here. Yeah, the polarization is definitely true. Okay, anything more on emergent decision making? Like, what do you think that like voting on things is like a good way to make decisions?
Depends.
Yeah, of course, always depends.
Is that necessarily emergent though? It's like someone. Okay, yeah, I guess it's like you're putting in some. Okay, I'm imagining more like there are people just doing like making their own decisions and creating action, and then like when you look at the group as a whole, something there's like a particular makeup of like there's still some movement towards a certain goal, shared interest.
Yeah, it seems just more like a do now, ask for forgiveness later kind of behavior, right?
Right.
Sometimes it can enable sort of the wisdom of crowds effect as well. Like there can be positive times when like a group of people, like the average of all of their decisions is better than any one person that you choose, or more accurate or whatever. So they've done some studies about that, but that of course is highly context dependent. Okay, what about consensus decision making? Did you talk about pros and cons of that?
Yeah. So for consensus, like I think there's a concept of mandate that I think is really interesting here, because on the pro side, right, if you don't get any rejections, you can take that as the mandate that you can go forward. Even though like people disagree with you, they'll understand, hey, I trust you enough to at least try this decision out. And so some decisions where we can take that kind of risk is definitely something you could apply it to. But I also think that the mandate thing can also go the other way as well. So one thing that I brought up, and I speak from experience because we've used this a little bit in our attempt to make a protocol for our hiring, is that given a decision, right? Sure, if somebody blocks it, then it doesn't go through, or we have to integrate the changes somehow, right? But more often than not, we don't get blocks. We get like some disagrees and a lot of abstains, right? Because when we put it to a vote, people aren't actually sort of like pumped up about the decision, and they're just more like, I go along with everyone else, what everyone else does. And so like, although there aren't technically no blocks, it's kind of disheartening when you see there are way more abstains than there are agrees. And so it kind of feels weird, like, do I still have the mandate to go forward? And I think if you make it clear, then yes, you can probably figure out that, like, yes, if people abstain, it just means they really trust you. But I think there can be a very easy trap where you just feel like, I don't actually feel empowered to make this decision because it seems like not a lot of people care, right? So
I'd also say, Kevin, just from my experience, that it also depends on what abstain means in your culture. I've been in groups where there's like a really healthy self-determining use of abstain, which is around the attention economy, or just how people are feeling, where they're sitting on their, their workload, or like for me, I know there's certain decisions that the group makes that I honestly, I really don't care. And so, yeah, I think that working out what abstain means in your culture can kind of sometimes shift it from feeling like, oh God, nobody cares, or I don't really have a mandate because I'm not getting a lot of green or red thumbs, to, yeah, something more positive. But I totally feel you.
Any comments from the other group, pros and cons of consensus decision making?
I have been in a situation where the consent decision making process was supposedly used, and I just noticed that when it's framed like you have to have a really serious objection in order to object to this, so that we can kind of push the decision through. And time was used as the reason for that. It just felt to me like we might as well not even be having this conversation. Like, you should just do whatever you want to do. Like, I don't know why you're bothering to run it by anybody. Like, if you don't really want to hear anybody's opinions, then, like, just do it. And it just felt like a way of like feeling good about, oh, we're doing it by consensus.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it really depends on, I guess, on the culture or the way that it's facilitated. Like, sometimes it is really like the only thing that the group wants to hear is serious objections. Otherwise, what's the point of even sharing? And then in other groups, it's like, there is a lot of feedback given, and people can share mild objections or enthusiastic support or other important kinds of communication. But I think what you said about time is really key. Like, in my experience, consensus decision making is never a good time if you are trying to rush. And if you're consistently trying to do that, I don't think you really get a lot of the benefits out of it. Like, the magic of consensus is when you can invest the time to go really deep with each other and build, like, truly, like, building on each other's ideas. And especially when a proposal, like the first proposal, like the response is, well, it could be better, and then everybody swarms on making it better, and then you get somewhere really amazing together. Like, that's when I found consensus to be like the most transformative. But as you're saying, Rosa, if you're in a time poor environment where people are like, no, we just have to get through this, I could imagine it being very unsatisfying.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, that kind of brings up a good point in a general sense, which is like, what really is the intention behind these types of decision making? Because for me, it creates a huge amount of cognitive dissonance when we're using a tool like consensus decision making that with really people who are really interested in being connected and like making a collaborative decision, I can totally get that it would feel great. And then when it's being used as a way of being able to say that there's consent, so that it looks a certain way, but there's not truly an intention to listen, it feels like crap, basically. And it's just like, just do whatever you want to do,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's true for probably several, maybe any decision-making protocol, but definitely several that we're talking about today. Like, I think those feelings could come up with, for example, we're just going to vote and majority wins. Like, there'll be people there who feel like, well, what's the point of me even sharing how I think? Or like, I think that what the intent is behind it, what the culture is around it, how it's facilitated, whether the words about decision making match the reality of decision making. Those things all really go into ultimately how successful is it, or how included are people, or how participatory, or how good of decisions do we make together.
Yeah, and I mean, just the final thing that I want to say on that is, like, I can get behind whatever the protocol is, but I really dislike being told that it's a particular protocol and then it's actually something else. And it's sort of like, at any regular company, you just kind of are like, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, 3 bags full, ma'am, kind of thing. And you either are on board or you're not on board. And it's sort of, there's more sanity in that in a certain way. But like, when there's a huge amount of cognitive dissonance about what's being said versus what's actually happening, it's almost worse. That's my thought about it.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And that's part of it. In a second, we're going to do like an individual exercise, and we're going to think about, does the words match the reality? Before we jump to that, is there any comments about advice process and like maybe pros and cons of that decision-making style?
Yeah, I liked advice because you can take a sample set from different groups. That'll kind of give you a more rounded picture of how your potential decision would affect different groups. And then at the same time, what do you call it? Oh yeah, your potential advice is limited to your network, or I guess how extroverted you are to talk to strangers or something. So yeah, it can be quite limited in that regard.
The thing that comes up for me about this style is that it's just business as usual. Like, my mom's a political advisor. Politicians have been using advisors for time immemorial. Like, I see it as the least innovative.
Like, it depends. Yeah, it depends how it's used in your context. In a lot of groups like teal organizations or people some organizations who use advice, the difference is kind of anybody can self-nominate as the decision maker and just basically kick off the process and be like, cool, I'm the decision maker, here we go. Which I don't think that's not the case in other contexts where a hierarchy or specific role titles or whatever defines who's the decision maker about certain things. So I think that's like a pro, and it's also the con, which is sometimes it's really hard to figure out who the decision maker is supposed to be. And yeah, people can get tripped up over that. Did you want to add to that, Susan? I think you probably have more experience with the advice process than I do.
Yeah, I've had equal numbers of bad experiences as good experiences. One bad experience that I can think of is with an org that their product company, they had a product pivot. The people in their customer success division didn't have the actual competencies to be able to provide support on where they pivoted to. So the product owner took advice from everybody else in the division except for the people impacted, and then went to the people impacted and said, oh, I've taken advice and we're going to have to lay you off because you don't have the competency to actually do this role moving forward. So that was, in my opinion, like a bastardization of the advice process, where the people that are most impacted should have been included in the conversation from the beginning. So that's where I've seen advice process go really wrong. The example that I love from the Reinventing Organizations book is Fabi, the auto parts manufacturer in France, where I think the story is that somebody on the shop floor had found out about some new tooling machine that he thought he felt really confident would cut, production time by X amount. And he went and sought advice from finance and from some external suppliers, and then basically he had the ability to make the decision for that 500,000 euro investment to buy a new machine, because he'd gone and got the advice from the people that had more information than he did. Or so I think it's just like any of these practices. And Rosa, thank you so much for like bringing to the surface that any of these processes can be manipulated, some more than others. But, as I always say, this isn't like decision-making and figuring out what is right for what circumstance isn't a one-time thing. It takes practice and intentional reflection on what's working and what's not to be able to land on what's right for you. And what might be right for you might very well be, what we're just so absolutely concerned with shipping out the door what we need to do, that I'm more than happy to delegate all the decisions to Alana. Could be in some situations a rational decision. But my point is, just with all of this stuff, is be conscious about it and be explicit about it.
Yeah. Okay, I think the next exercise we're about to do will kind of help us think about some of those ideas a little bit more deeply and maybe share a bit more. I'll just share my screen. So basically the ask is to think about a decision that you've been involved in. You don't necessarily have had to be the decision maker. Maybe you were the decision maker, or maybe you were affected by the decision, or maybe it was just close enough for you to observe this decision. So yeah, but think of a real, actual, specific decision, and think about what decision type did it follow. Like maybe it was one of the 9 that we covered, but maybe it was something else. Was the protocol explicit? Like, did you know what the decision-making protocol was? Like, did you even know a decision was happening, or did it like afterwards you realized? And did reality, match that claim of what the decision-making protocol was? So that's sort of what came up just a moment ago. You can say that it's consensus or whatever, but if the power is actually over here, then maybe it's not. And just what worked well and what could have been better. So take a couple minutes just to yourself. And think about that. You can write down the answers if you want to, or just think about it, and then we'll come back and hear from everyone. So yeah, take like 2 minutes. All right, start to wrap up your thinking. We'll come back in about 30 seconds. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can see each other as we're sharing back. Cool. All right. I'll go first. A recent decision I was involved in, I was working with a team. We were building a security utility for crypto tools. And we got a grant from the Ethereum Foundation, which is really cool. Like, it was great to get a grant, and it wasn't enough to cover all of the team members. So we had to make a decision to like kind of cut the team down. Who was going to keep working on the thing and who was going to do something else. Protocol, was it explicit? I think it was explicit. We used a unanimous decision protocol. It's like, this is a really like highly cooperative group, and it would not have been our choice to like fire somebody against their will. This was like, it was important to us that we come to this decision together. I'd say reality did match. I think it matched. What worked well about it? I think it worked pretty well. Like, I actually took myself out of the team because I was like, I have other stuff I could be working on. And also I think the skills, like, it was more the like hardcore dev skills that were needed in the next phase. And that's not my main focus. So I thought it'd be better if the rest of the team carried on and I went and did something else. But also like, got feedback from everyone else. And there was also like, oh, how many, some people are going to be part-time and some people are going to be more time. So there was quite a bit of negotiation, but that worked well. Like, communication was good. What could have been better? I don't know. I think it like kind of maybe dragged on too long. Like, if it had been up to me, I would have just been like, peace, bye, you guys have fun. And like, it might have been much shorter. Like, I guess I was feeling antsy because it's like, we only have this much amount of funding. We don't have heaps of time, like way more important to get on and build the thing. But also I guess it was really important to have those conversations and like reinforce the trust and communication. And I do think in the future, when we're making decisions, that experience will help us like be in a better place in our relationships and stuff. Okay, I'm going to call on Rosa.
I was thinking of a time that there was a decision that came up on Lumio, which we have used in the Australian solutions team, around whether we should introduce quotas in terms of diversity. And there were a lot of votes, and ultimately I didn't really agree with the outcome, but the way in which the decision was made was really transparent and open, and I really accepted the result, and it did feel congruent, like it matched the reality of what we said we were doing. I don't know which decision style Lumio would be, though. Do you know?
It kind of depends. So like in some groups with Lumio, like they will use it as more of a majority rules type protocol. In some groups, it's like if anybody blocks, then it's like we're using it as consensus. It kind of depends on your culture as a group.
Yeah, the thing that I liked about it was that people gave their answer and explained their answer. So it felt more in depth than just a majority rules vote. That's all I got.
Cool. Thanks, Rosa. Can we go to Will?
I'm thinking about a couple. I'm thinking about a couple different decisions. I guess I'll talk about, like I'm interested in bringing up something that's like slightly more sensitive, but I don't necessarily know how to go about it.
We could stop recording.
Yeah.
Very clean. So, okay. I'll just repeat it again now that we're recording. I'm just going to talk about our hiring protocol stuff. So initially it was very emergent, and that was not the cleanest way to do hiring for people. Not a lot of sort of referring to other people for feedback. So after many iterations, our current iteration at the very least, and I doubt this is the last one we're landing on, is a combination of advice-based and what's the other one? Decentralized. What was it? No, advice-based and consensus. Yes, advice-based and consensus. That's the combination. So like there's multiple stages, and each one has its own kind of distinct voting policy. And so the earlier ones are definitely more consensus-based. And then the final round, when we really need to like close down on the decision, it turns into an advice-based one. And so let's see. So yeah, there was definitely an explicit protocol. We now have one, thankfully. Does reality match though? I think we've just had a few bad experiences with how our previous protocol went, such that maybe our pendulum may have swung a little bit too far in the other direction. So now we may be sort of tying ourselves up in bureaucracy and a lot of sort of safety in terms of hiring, which can be okay probably, especially as we're slowing down. But maybe like if we ever wanted to make a quicker hire, suddenly that just becomes an issue. So what works well about it though is that it gives people in earlier stages a more liberal way of sort of weeding out candidates, because like I really don't jive with this person. Sorry, no. So that's great. But when it comes to sort of like getting to a candidate that's been very much vetted by a lot of other people, we don't want to sort of get held up by sort of, oh, people are just very or very sort of, they have their objections, but it's not like super blocky. By using the advice process, we're able to sort of like, okay, for the specific place that we're hiring, only those people are allowed to decide whether or not they want to sort of have this person come on board, especially as they hear all the other feedback from all the other stages. So that's great. So what could be better though, I think, is just finding more ways to streamline it, because I do think it just takes a little bit of a while. Maybe we can adjust the number of days that we spend on like comment periods. I think there's one comment period that can last up to 5 days. And like in this organization where you just have to be very fast, it can feel like forever. So yeah, I think it's just about a lot of tweaking sort of the parameters so that we're in a better place. But yeah, this is the result of a lot of iteration. My God. So, cool. Rosa.
I think Rose already went. Yeah.
You already went? Sorry. Jem?
Tim or Jem?
Jem.
Or Jem's in listening mode, I think.
Oh.
We have David as well. I guess we can do Tim. Sorry, Tim.
No, it's okay. I'd love to explain about a recent decision-making policy in the type. I think it was a combination of emergent slash it was kind of like three, it was like emergent and it was decentralized and it was consensus in the end. So yeah, we were just we were trying to get an application working, and we're using React Native, and it was very slow and seemed like a second-class citizen. So we decided to just do like iOS and Swift stuff. And I feel like that was emergent. It was also decentralized because we were doing these decisions and development ad hoc. And then we kind of came to consensus a little bit about it. Like, this seems like the best way to go. I don't know what else I have to say. Yeah, that's it. Sorry, guys.
Okay. Thanks, Tim. David, did you want to share, or you've been typing in the chat, haven't you? You're welcome to speak if you want to, or not. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. So time got away a little bit, but the slides are in the folder. If you want to look, there's more stuff in there about Lumia and collaborative decision-making process and the pros and cons that we noted down from our discussion. Let's see, David said, I thought about a lot of decisions. I think a lot of them use multiple strategies. Yep. Yeah, that's common. And I guess it's just the question of then, is that working well is that working, or could it be better if we were more decisive about our decision-making protocols? That's a question to take with you. And Susan's going to talk about, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. And the one I was thinking about was in the middle of a collaborative decision-making process, and then some parameters changed, and one of the participants came in with I say it was dictatorial. It was between dictatorial and distributed. So yeah, like sometimes decisions can involve multiple protocols, and that felt really yucky. But sometimes it happens. So thanks, Alana, and thanks for filling in the pros and cons on the slides as well. I think that'll be really helpful for everybody. So just quickly, we have got literally 2 more minutes. Time really did get away. And I think that for me, this is a bit of a validation that the first 201 level class that we're going to do is going to be on decision making. So I think watch out for that. Let me just open up thing that I wanted to show you. So for the assignments for this week, your teams are in the team drive. So the individual assignment is basically just to pick one of the decision-making methods we're learning about this week and explicitly apply it to or propose it for a decision you're going to make at work in your team, and then reflect on what worked and what didn't work. And then the group assignment is if you click on the link here, it'll take you to an activity sheet. And if you click on the link in the activity sheet, it takes you through kind of the process for doing this particular assignment with your team. Pretty straightforward. I think you'll have fun doing it. I noticed that we've got 1 minute left. So
did we shift teams for this assignment?
Yeah,
sorry.
We shifted teams for this week. Yeah. And it's in the new weekly team sheet. So just thanks everybody for your presence here today. I think that I really enjoyed the session, and I think that, like I said, this could take. We could do this for weeks, and we still wouldn't know everything. So one word checkout. How are you feeling right now? I am tired. Kevin.
A little frantic, to be honest. Alana?
Yeah, feeling squeezed. Will.
Starting my day here, feeling pretty good. A little bit hungry. Yeah, also the town hall. Feeling good. Thanks for the good session, y'all. Oh, I should call somebody. Jen. If it's working, otherwise. That's it.
David says worn out. Tim?
Yeah, I feel full. I just ate, so feel satisfied. And there's 4 hours left before midnight, so I guess I'm gonna work.
Okay. We got Rosa left.
I think I feel kind of neutral.
Well, on that note. Well, thanks everyone.
Do like
I know it was a lot.
movement, like I don't know, like we could all do a group scream.
Yeah, I can.
How about we all mute ourselves and do a group scream?
Okay, ready?
Okay.
1, 2.
I just did that in the office. Oh my god.
See you all on Thursday/Friday. Bye. Bye.